It must be something we haven't seen yet.
Hello and welcome back to Cameron, King of the World Special Edition. And finally, I'm sitting down to talk about Avatar: The Way of Water in a form that I was not originally expecting to talk about the film in. So I had a different vision for this video, which I'm now realizing I have to kind of junk. So I started filming stuff for this before the film even came out. I went to Norway with Connie for a family trip over Christmas. It was an early Christmas in Norway in the days leading up to the release of Avatar: The Way of Water. And the night before we left, I went out into minus 20-degree weather to buy some Norwegian candy and some Norwegian pop. And I documented some of that in kind of a vlog form. And I was going to use that and that was going to be this video. And it was going to be me taking you, with me and with us on this journey to watch this film together. Because the backstory is that the first film me and Connie saw together in the cinema was Avatar in January of 2010. The buzz had been big and I hadn't seen it yet, and so we went along to the cinema. It was the second time we'd ever met, and it was the week where we told each other we loved each other. It was a very special and important time. And now, all these years later, here we are in the same city again. Only so much has happened in between those kind of 12 years, almost 13 years, and well, yeah, no, it would be 13 years. And so I thought it would be nice to vlog the experience. But the vlog that I filmed on the way to the cinema was a somber one. All the best intentions you have in the world of something being special or this is going to be a good day. And sometimes life throws shit at you. And I talk about that in the vlog, and I might release it someday. I don't know. It might be something to revisit down the line. I'll keep the footage for sure, but I felt like I just needed to set this video apart and make it just a straight review. Obviously, I'm telling you at the beginning here because it hugely plays into my experience with the film the first time that I saw it. So we unfortunately came back from Norway and found that our cat Lily was not eating very well, and she'd been getting skinny for a while. We'd been trying to like up her food to kind of get her, nice and fat again, but it wasn't helping. So we took her to the vet, and there was a problem with her heart and her lungs, and it was a lot of money to do a lot of tests. And she hates being at the vets, and she's very frail. And I picked her up when we got home, and you could feel every bone in her body. It was horrible. And we felt very guilty about we should have taken her to the vet sooner, but she had a lot of problems. She was 11, so not really that old, but still old at the same time. And the other option was to put her down, which we wouldn't even consider, of course, but then she just stopped eating. And we realized that it was her time, unfortunately, and it was a lot of denial from both of us. But the day that we had to do that was the day that Avatar came out. And that was the only day we had to go and see it, which was the 16th of December, the premiere day, the first showing. I think it was 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock I think it was, at the IMAX. And we had to put her down that day, and the only available appointment was in the evening, around 5 o'clock. So Connie wasn't going to go to watch Avatar. There was no way she could do it. But then, Lily just hid all day under the bed. So my mum came over. Lily knows my mum. She lived with her for a while. So she stayed at the house, and but she didn't really come out from under the bed or anything. And Connie decided to come. So we went to the cinema. We saw the film. But the whole time we're watching this film, we're thinking about the fact that we're going to have to say goodbye to our baby. This amazing creature that we loved so much and had had for 11 years since she was a tiny little kitten we could fit in the palm of our hands. And then this film is about, the connection between animals and quote unquote humans, right? But also the connection between us and nature and the cycle of life and everything. And so it made the viewing gut punchingly kind of emotional in an extra added real world way. So it was difficult. The credits rolled on the film. Connie had a bit of a cry there. She said it was a combination of the way the film ended and the music at the end and knowing what we had to do. And I think that in a way it was a good escape for us to just sit in a room for 3 hours and be entertained by this film. I was able to be entertained by the film, and Connie was too, but once the distraction's over, real world hits you again, and you walk out of that cinema knowing in a couple of hours, one of the creatures, one of the living things that I've loved more than anything in my life won't be around anymore. It was very difficult. And when she was taken to be put down, they did say, looking at her, that it was the right choice and that you know, it was the best option for her to not be in that kind of pain. And obviously she'd stopped eating. And the thing for me, I don't want to waffle on about it too much, bring this video down, but I was so grateful that we were able to say goodbye to her, as difficult as that was. And in a way, it almost felt like she was holding on, because we went to Norway for 2 weeks. And when we came back, she wasn't eating very well. Took her to the vets. Next day, she stopped eating. It really was like she held on just to say goodbye to us. I might choose to believe that, I don't know, but either way, I highly value the 10 minutes I spent with her alone upstairs the day before she died. So it was a difficult day at the office, and so I wanted to be transparent about that, and I mentioned that in the vlog, but by the time we got to the cinema, I didn't feel like vlogging anymore. I wanted to film like us going in and our thoughts afterwards, but it wasn't a thoughts afterwards kind of experience. We walked pretty much in silence with the occasional round of tears. And we talked about the film a little bit, but it was not something to film. So that was the plan. And Avatar: The Way of Water. So I'm going to talk about the film in spoiler-free terms. Even though it's been out for 3 weeks now, it's tomorrow will be the 3-week mark of it being out in the cinemas, and I think I should make a whole other video about the box office sensation that it has become, and all of the hilarious things that people have been saying to discredit the film and call it a flop along the way. That will be a separate video, because it's just hilarious to me how that was spun by a lot of people. But anyway, let's get into the film. So I had high expectations going in, and I was a little bit nervous. And the kind of the preamble to the film, in terms of the critics, when the critics first saw when the internet critics first saw the film, there was a lot of buzz, and it was a lot of, and it did my head in, to be honest. It was all the never bet against James Cameron, never count out James Cameron. It's like, yeah, everyone's saying the same thing. Can we retire that phrase? Yeah, that was a little bit of a, I don't know. I get it. Like, I get it. But at the same time, it was exciting to see that people were really into it. And people were saying it was much better than the first film, because I love the first film. So I was like, well, wow, that sounds great. But then, like, the more kind of highbrow critics kind of got their hands in it a few days later, and a lot of scathing reviews, and, a wet puddle of a movie and all of this stuff. And so there was a mixed bag of kind of reactions to the film. But, I knew that either way, I would have my own opinions and thoughts on it when I went in to see it. And I was highly intrigued to see if this would live up to what I was expecting, which was a James Cameron film, one of my favorite directors. I don't dislike any of his films. I love all of his films for the most part. I think True Lies is the one that hasn't held up as much, but the rest, and The Abyss, I kind of struggle with a little bit, but, I love his filmography, and so I was just intrigued, and being a fan of the first film. So we sit down, we watch it, IMAX 3D. It looks incredible. I mean, the 3D, again, I can kind of take or leave, but there is a clarity there, and in certain scenes, there's a lovely spatial depth. In action scenes, you kind of forget about it. I feel I've said that before, and I'll probably say it again, and over time, you kind of forget that it's there too. But the IMAX picture quality and the sound, unbelievable. Like, you're feeling the sound in the seats. It really is the way to see movies, and it's so expensive now, but for me, it's worth it for select movies, especially something like this, which is a visual feast of a film. 3 hours long without credits, and it's an epic. It really rattles along in the first act. Like, it really sets up so much and gets the story going very quickly, to the point where I feel like, if I have a criticism of this film, is I think it's not long enough. And I also think it lags a little bit in the second act, even though I love everything about it. There's not a scene in it I would take out, so that's kind of a weird statement to make, but I do think in the middle it does get very slow. And I feel like if the first act was longer, and the first act had a bit more breathing room, I think the second act would feel more naturally consistent with the rest of the film. And then the third act is just, incredible. The way that whole big battle at the end pans out, and it really goes on and on. It's an incredible sequence, like the way that it's put together. And I saw an interview with Guillermo del Toro, and he said that if you were to ask me either die or direct one of those sequences in the third act of Avatar: The Way of Water, I would say start preparing my coffin, because he just thought that it was so complex and complicated and impressive. And I can see where he's coming from. Like the third act battle sequence is nuts. And I've seen the film twice now. I did go back again the week after, and it's just a marvel. That third, yeah, no pun intended when Avatar is being compared so closely to Marvel now, because obviously we've had Wakanda Forever this year, we've had Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Thor: Love and Thunder, and all three of them have been flattened at the box office by Avatar. But so that's a conversation that's being had. But anyway, regardless of that, I do think the first act is rushing a bit to get things going and to say, okay, this and this and this and this. So Jake and Neytiri have children, and then here they go, and they come along, and then this one, and I would have liked maybe another 5 minutes in the first act, maybe 10, to get to know some of the kids a little bit better before we start moving the plot onwards. And do I even really need to talk about the plot? If you're watching this video, you've seen the film more than likely, so I don't really need to recap it too much. But for the sake of housekeeping, Jake and Neytiri, some 14, 15 years after the events of the first film, Jake is now fully assimilated into his Na'vi body, his avatar, and is living as one of the people. And he is essentially the leader of the clan, the Omaticaya. And him and Neytiri, they have children. Their firstborn is Neteyam, and then the avatar of Grace Augustine, Sigourney Weaver's character from the first film, has become. And this is all within the first 10 minutes of the movie. I say this is a spoiler-free review, and I feel like it doesn't need to be, because I'm so late now. And the reason it's taken me so long to get around to talking about this is because of the whole thing with Lily passing away. I just haven't felt like A, talking about it, and B, doing anything really. It's just been a bit of a depressing holiday period for me. So yeah, so doing a spoiler-free review almost a month after the film is out is kind of redundant. Anyone who wants to see the film has probably seen it by now. But so Grace Augustine's avatar became pregnant, and so they had the body still in a tube, and is preserved, and the child was born, and Jake and Neytiri adopted her and named her Kiri. So we have Neteyam and Kiri, and then they kind of Jake is like saying in his narration, which is carried over from the first film, is the overarching and arcing narration from Jake Sully. He talks about how and then we had 4 kids, so it feels like it almost brushes over the other 2 a little bit. Where we have Loak, their next kid, a boy, and then Tuk, the youngest, little girl. So they have 4 kids, and I was under the impression leading into the film that there was a human child who they had adopted called Spider, and you see very clearly when the film starts that he's really more just a kind of a wandering kind of nomad child. Yeah, he kind of is very close with the kids, but they set up very clearly that Neytiri is like, he's not one of us, And then we find out that he is the son of Colonel Quaritch, who is back in Na'vi form. And we get the kind of setup on that. I loved his introduction when he wakes up and he's just punching people and stuff, and then when he finally calms down, he's like, I'm alright. And then he looks at his teeth and he's like, ain't that a bitch, And I think that Stephen Lang was incredible in this film, and the way that his character came out of this Na'vi, CGI character was brilliant. And in general, the motion capture stuff has advanced so, and it was advanced in 2009 when they did it. It was really unlike anything anyone had ever seen before at that time. But it's improved here, and I completely forget I'm watching a digital character. I'm just seeing the characters and the performances, and being so impressed by them, and believing in them, which is that's the goal really, of making the effect so good that you're not questioning the fact that this isn't a real thing. You're just enjoying the story. So Stephen Lang as this Na'vi version of Quaritch with his memories and his personality. But I find it really interesting because a few times he kind of mentions, because obviously he has this connection with this young boy who was Quaritch's son, and he says like, I'm not your father, like I have this guy's memories and personality, but we're not really related. We're not even the same species. So he's acknowledging that, like, whatever I am isn't really Quaritch. I have his memories and his personality, and I'm going to follow the orders the way that he would. But and I really hope that they follow that thread moving forward, and that kind of artificial intelligence in a way, in a very different form than we're used to, because this is the memories of a man, but who's the soul inside that body? Is it just an emulation of Quaritch, or is it another individual? And will that individual start to come out and kind of use Quaritch's memories to become a different person? I don't know. I found it really intriguing, and I really hope that that's explored. And regardless of where they go with it, I think that compared to the first film, the character of Quaritch has like 1,000% more depth. And I've got no problem with him being a cigar chomping, one dimensional, cartoonish, just straight up, 10 out of 10 villain in the first film. Like, there's no depth to him whatsoever. He's just a prick, a murdering bastard, And there's a simplicity to that, and an appeal to that in a film where you want a bad guy to root for the good guys to kind of beat at the end. But here we have someone who is not really fully that, and there's a lot more, when he takes Spider with him for the majority of the movie, and we see that relationship kind of, there's manipulation going on there, but there's also mixed feelings going on there, and that's very intriguing to me. I found that stuff really good. I heard that people found Spider annoying. I really liked the character and the performance from the young actor. I like all the performances, really. There wasn't much. There was one beat at the beginning when Kiri and Loak and Spider are in the kind of the Avatar pod, and they're with the kind of lifeless Navi Avatar of Grace. And Kiri is like, hi mama and all that stuff. She's there to see her mother. And then they're kind of joking around with her that Norm was her father or whatever, and she's like, I'd rather eat acid. And then, Spider's like, hey, maybe it's not so good to think about who your father was. No, forget it. And it was a bit awkwardly acted and a bit obvious and a bit. That was the only part of the whole film I thought that kind of stood out. I was like, oh, that's a bit. It didn't quite sit right. I think it felt a bit kind of, 4 o'clock in the afternoon soap opera kind of moments. I don't know, but the rest of the film, I really have little complaints at all. Again, it's just the pacing, I think, of some of it, and that's pretty much it. And the story is very, and again, I could sit here and go on and on about it, I suppose, and I know that I could do probably an hour-long review on this thing, but I don't want to bog this further. I want to just give my initial impressions without going over everything. So, and so the story takes us from there, and we see the beginnings of this family, this dysfunctional family. I love how Cameron set up the language, because even I, going into the film, was thinking, all right, so we've seen in the trailers that Jake and his family go to the reef people of the Metcaina, and why are they all speaking English? Because they live out in the ocean. Like, there's no Grace Augustine English program out there, so why are they speaking English? And it's very simply set up at the beginning, where Jake is narrating over watching his kids grow up, and he's like, yeah, the language took a while for me to fully master in those first few years, but eventually it all just started to sound like English. And literally the subtitles fade away from the screen, and his children's Navi language then just morphs into English. And so really a lot of the film is basically, that's kind of an interpretation of what's actually happening. I like that. It was like Cameron just kind of poking his head into frame, going, guys, relax, it's just a movie. They're going to be speaking English, just roll with it, and don't, I like that. It was kind of fun, a bit of a meta moment. But so they're all happy. That line, happiness is easy. And then the Sky People return, and I like that it's been like 14, 15 years since everything went down in the first film. That's how long it took them to regroup and redouble their efforts on kind of now colonizing Pandora. And this briefly touched on that this is actually an effort to create a new home for mankind. I like that idea. I heard some criticisms that it was half-baked and not explored very much. I can only assume that will be the through line of the next 3 movies, and that'll be the fight for them to wage against the humans and stuff. I would only assume that's going to play into the larger story later on. So Jake and his family, they come into contact with not really the humans, but the recoms, the military avatars who've been kind of preserved from, you know, the first movie, the first mission. And so we have Quaritch back and his kind of his crew back in Na'vi bodies, stronger, you know, tougher, taller, meaner, you know, and badder. And they're gonna go in and take out Jake Sully because Jake is leading the resistance against the Sky People now that they've kind of made their kind of base on Pandora. They built a city very quickly with the, and I like how they explained that with the little scuttle droids that kind of can put a building together in a couple of weeks, whatever it was. Because when I first saw the subtitle 1 year later, and there's this whole human city, I was like, hang on a minute. But I like that they explained it, and there's a lot of automation going on and very quick building, and you know they're going to take over the planet pretty quickly. They've established a lot, and Jake is leading the fight against the, you know, leading the resistance of the Na'vi against the Sky People. But then you have his children who are kind of getting involved, and there's a lot going on there with his eldest son Neteyam and his other son Loak. A lot of tension there between the eldest son, who's kind of the prize child, and the younger son, who feels like, you know, he's kind of in the shadow of his older brother, and he wants to be a, you know, warrior too and everything. But Jake's family gets compromised and threatened, and he decides that ultimately for him, he needs to protect his family by leaving and going elsewhere on Pandora. So he takes them off to the reef people of the Metcaina. They kind of reluctantly take them in and train them in the ways of the water, basically. But now, you know, Quaritch is on the hunt, and he's got all those memories of this animosity towards Jake Sully, and so he's going to follow that to the end. And so he is looking for where Jake has taken his family, and it all leads to a big battle at the end. This massive ocean battle with a big, huge ship, and boats with harpoons, and Na'vi riding these kind of a mix between the Banshees from the first film, but they also go underwater. I don't know what the creatures are called. And then the Tolkun, essentially a whale. Apparently Cameron has been quite prickly about they're not whales, but the Tolkun, these huge, you know, sea mammals, are involved in this too. And I loved the concept of those characters, the execution, but also the Payakan, the one that Loak encounters out in the ocean and kind of bonds with. I loved all that stuff. I loved Kiri. I loved the Kiri character played by Sigourney Weaver, who's like, you know, 12, 13, 14. And it's, you know, it's moving to me to see, because Aliens is one of my top 3 favorite films of all time. This first film I ever saw. Big fan of Sigourney Weaver, big fan of that film. And it warmed my heart to see her do another James Cameron film in Avatar. And it touched me again to see her working with him again in this film, and now in a completely different way. And her character is so important to this story and will be huge, I think, moving forward. And I just thought she was a lot of fun, and she felt like a teenager. She was, you know, and I think that she's probably going to be quite relatable for kind of teenagers who feel a little bit different, a little bit on the outside. You know, she's interested in weird things. She has like a fascination with nature, a connection with Awa potentially, and but also she's just a, you know, an eye rolly kind of teenager too. So it was a really cool combination and a really good character, I think. Neteyam, I think, could have had a bit more development maybe, which is something I think I would have liked to have seen a bit more in the first act. Loak gets the kind of lion's share of the kind of development. I think he's a character that's really focused on as that, again, that middle child who feels a little bit left out and unfairly targeted by his father. I've heard people say that Jake Sully is a shit father, and I think yes, that is the point, you know. And I almost look at this as an analog for James Cameron, because he's very much drawing from his own experiences as a father. That was his inspiration for taking this story in a new direction, of these characters having a family and having things to worry about beyond just themselves. They now have kids to protect, and that makes things very different when you're in a battle situation, and when the Sky People have returned. So that was, you know, and it made things different, obviously, than the first film in that respect. People say, oh, this is just a remake of the first film. Well, it's very different in terms of a lot of things, especially the fact that they're parents, and it's not just about fighting the bad guys and winning. It's about fighting the bad guys and winning and making sure all their kids are safe. And they don't just have 1 or 2. They have like 4 kids they need to keep their eyes on, all of varying degrees of self-sufficiency in situations like this. So Loak kind of gets, he's kind of the main character of the kids, I would say, in terms of the overall film. and his connection with Payakan and his struggles with his dad, But and yeah, so Jake, he almost is treating his kids like soldiers, and he's the leader, as Neytiri says at the beginning of the film. This is not a squad; it's a family. Another thing, Neytiri definitely doesn't have as much screen time in this film as the first one, even though this one is longer. People criticize that, but I think that when Neytiri shines in this film, or when she's given the spotlight, holy shit. An incredible performance once again from Zoe Saldana steals the show for me. She's just incredible as this woman, this warrior, And I love it. There's a lot of emotional moments for her in this film, and a lot of this kind of raw catharsis, which was very powerful to watch unfold. So I think when she's on screen, it counts. But I like that Jake isn't a great father, because that's an arc for him to go on. That's something he can get better at. He isn't this perfect dad. If you forget, he was just this military guy who had nothing and was thrown into this whole situation. Of course, he's not going to be like a great dad. He doesn't seem to have a very good foundation in his life to begin with, even though he learnt a lot and seemed to grow a lot when he became ingratiated into the Na'vi culture in the first film. That still doesn't set him up for being a good father. Not to say that he's a bad one entirely. You can tell that he loves his kids and he's great at playing with them and they look up to him and things. But he certainly has made mistakes and does in this film, and that was a key part of why I loved it, because it was just different and interesting. Because you get to the point where it's not so much about Jake saving the day. It's about his kids saving the day in some ways and kind of finding ways to surprise him, and I like that a lot. But it's a very emotional third act, which I was not expecting, and I was surprised by where it went, and kind of felt like I should have seen it coming at the same time. But the third act is just mental. It's the action is it's unlike anything you see anywhere else. I love the Marvel movies, I really do, but when it comes to the fight scenes and stuff, there's a style to it that is not entirely as satisfying as something like this, which is, to me, just so much more carefully crafted. And to be fair, he gets more time. Cameron spends years making these movies. The Marvel ones, they've got to churn them out within 12 months. But I think that the action, just the spectacle, set piece storytelling that Cameron does is unparalleled. It's really been there since the beginning. I think with Terminator, there was definitely, you could see how good he was at constructing tension and suspense and payoff and action, but also rooted around characters that you cared about. Aliens took it to a whole other level with that. That whole third act of Aliens is just unbelievable. So well done. And then Terminator 2, one of the best action films ever made. True Lies, even Titanic, it's a thrilling spectacle set piece. Same with Avatar. The final battle in the sky in Avatar is fantastic. And so with this one, we have the water kind of version of that, but it's just, so many great beats that even the second time I watched it, I thought, oh my God, I forgot how cool that moment was, and that moment. And in between all of it, you've got these characters in peril that I really cared about, so I really grew to kind of become attached to his kids, and that for me was what really made the film, was the emotional connection. I see a lot of people saying, oh, well, anyone I know who's seen Avatar 2 just says that the visuals were great, but no one says anything about the story, and it's like, the story and the characters were the best part for me. Like, yes, he once again kind of raised the bar on a visual experience. For me, it probably is the best film. Let me just rephrase that without sounding like I'm making a leading statement, but it's the best kind of it's the best visual effects, digital visual effects in a film ever. I think when you look at how it's a 3-hour movie that is pretty much entirely digitally animated, and I never really question the reality of anything. And apparently they did kind of do some kind of live action trickery with, like, Avatar hands and things like that, or Navi hands, but for the most part, you're looking at a lot of digital stuff, and it's just next level stuff. It really, really is. And so there is that part of it, but it doesn't work for me unless the characters are there. And the characters are there, the story's there. I was engaged. Is it groundbreaking in terms of the storytelling? No, it doesn't need to be. A lot of movies don't need to be that. I loved it. I really did. I do think the first film for me is slightly better. I think the through line, the one, two, three act kind of structure is a lot better and smoother, and the thrill of going into Pandora for the first time is a bit more exciting than what this story sets up. But I prefer the characters in the second film. And it's more emotional for sure. So yeah, kind of gun to my head, I would say I prefer the first film, and and I think it's a better film as well. But it's they're pretty even for me too, and I actually loved this new one, The Way of Water. There's some great lines in it. I love the reverence with which Cameron treats the nature and the animals in it, and there's so much to go into. I could rattle on about this for a very long time, but I'm gonna leave it there. I love the film. It was a tough experience emotionally the first time I saw it because of our cat, being put down that same day. Going back to see it again the second time in 2D on a much smaller screen, which was kind of strange. It was like watching a film, on your nice 60-inch TV in your living room, and then going into the next room and watching it again on your phone. Like, it was a normal cinema screen, but compared to the IMAX, it was pretty small, and we were sat right at the back, me and my dad. But that was nice for me. I got to share a cinema experience with my dad. There were other people who came with us, which I was like, I just wanted to have just me and because I know my dad loves the first Avatar, and he was excited about it, which is like, wow, this is unusual. But either way, I was sat next to my dad. We had two glass bottles of Coke, gave him a clink, the film started, and he nodded off a bit in the middle. I kept having to nudge him throughout the film, but he came out and he's like, that was wicked. Bit long though, wasn't it? Which seems to be a fair complaint. I do think that it's not that it's long. I think that the second act is so slow and the first act is so fast. I think there's a bit of an imbalance there, and I think that the first act could do with more time. I do think if it was a 3 hour and 20 minute movie with a kind of a richer, deeper first act that kind of sets up the family more than it does, and maybe I don't know. I feel like it would balance the whole movie out a bit better, but that's just me. That's my guts knee-jerk reaction to that. Anyway, and the music was great. I love that it still kept a lot of those familiar themes. Obviously, James Horner passed away, so couldn't return for this, but the composer, Simon Franklin, I think is his name, he worked with James Horner for many years, so there's a familiarity there, I suppose, and I did really like some of the new themes. And and that's kind of part and parcel of the whole package, I think, is the visuals and the music and the story and the characters, which I loved. So I'll leave it there. That's my initial impressions of Avatar: The Way of Water. I will come back in the future with a spoiler-filled kind of deep dive, maybe hour-long video, and I want to try and see it again in high frame rate just to have an opinion on that, I suppose, and just to see what it looks like. And we'll talk about that in the future if I manage to see it in that way. It would need to take a London trip, which is a bit tough, but I'm going to try and make it happen. And then we'll also talk about the box office of the film and the whole journey of that. But maybe I'll wait and see where the film lands on its final gross, because I think it's a fascinating story. It's such an anomaly at the box office right now. It really isn't tracking where people thought it would, both at the beginning and now. And it's just kind of surprising people, and I find that really interesting. So I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.